The Arizona Cardinals schedule, we know the list of opponents, right? And then we wait a couple months and we see a year. I can't remember how long the wait is when we know the opponents. And then we wait to see what the official schedule is. Week 1 here, week 7 there, week 12 there, and so on.
Right.
When we are preparing our content on ArizonaSports.com for the NFL schedule, Tyler Drake is the one who will take this mantle in recent years. We'll write up here are the most intriguing games to watch. And you're not writing week 12 to week 14, you're looking at the opponents more so. So when we were doing it for this schedule, you obviously had to highlight this game. And you had to highlight it because it was Kliff Kingsbury coming back for the first time since he was fired. Even if this game wasn't in Arizona, it would still matter. But it matters even more that it's here. Or does it, Mitch? How much does this really matter that Kliff is back? K1 versus K2? What is this to you? What are you reading from this or not reading?
I'm reading it based off of the way that the two subjects that we are about to talk about are answering questions about one another. So we came back and you just heard Kliff asked about Kyler. Now it's interesting when Kyler is asked about Kliff.
What do you mean? I've seen him since. yeah, I've seen him since. Just out and about.
Okay. Well, what about when you face Kliff?
To be honest, man, and I'm completely honest, that doesn't. I've done it before. I've competed against, him before. Many other coaches that I've been coached by. Doesn't really affect me. My goal is to go out and win the game.
I think it's fair to say that Kyler doesn't want to talk about Kliff, and infer whatever you want. But I don't think Kliff wants to talk about Kyler either. Even though he said all of those nice things, he doesn't really want to say much about it.
So there are 3 ways this will go. Okay. 1, Monty Williams is in town, and Devin Booker speaks glowingly about what Monty meant to him. And
yes.
People know those guys were tight, and that's a lot of these types of examples. When a fired coach comes back, the player will answer in that way. 2, you get some version of a diplomatic answer, which is, I think, what we got from Kyler, but I agreed with the point that John Gambadoro made yesterday on Burns and Gambo, which is that there were ways for him to be like, I really appreciated my time with Kliff, all this kind of stuff. He didn't really want to go that far, or didn't choose to go that far, I should say.
No.
In the moment. And then there's 3, which is like the no comment, I don't want to talk about it. And then it's like, oh man, there's a lot there. Most recently, the Tua stuff with Brian Flores, where it was like, whoa, okay.
He said a lot.
You're just saying all this stuff.
Yeah.
So we're landing somewhere in the middle, which is 2. And I think that's fine and kind of matches what happened here. It seemed like your guys' interview with Kyler, where he talked about wanting to play under center more and that kind of stuff, there haven't really been illuminating conversations or reports even from Kliff or from Kyler figuring out exactly what happened with them and where it went wrong, where it went right, who was upset or frustrated or whatever, and how this kind of went. So I'm with you. There wasn't really much of a spectacle here, but the 2 were tied together. And there's a cut somewhere in there about Kliff talking about how he bet on Kyler. That's part of his career, essentially. And it made me bring pause if you want to play it right now.
Yeah, I believe it was this one.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch him. The end of last year, I thought you could see the confidence getting back in the knee, and he made a bunch of big plays, played really well, and he's played great this season. They're a couple plays away from being undefeated. So you see the speed, the quickness, the competitive nature is there. So it's been great to see. He's a guy I basically banked my entire career on what he would be, and I still believe in it. And it's cool to see him playing as well as he is.
You know what's interesting? You bring that up, and the first thing that I thought about in sort of the counter argument, Kyler didn't have to bank on Kliff. Kyler only had to bank on himself, whereas Kliff, he said it right there, banked his entire career on a guy that's banking on himself.
But does he say no to this job if Kyler's not the quarterback? I still think that this job was such an alluring opportunity for him after what happened at Texas Tech that he was going to take this job.
But he said Josh is our guy. Josh Rosen is their guy.
Josh Rosen was their guy.
Obviously being sarcastic.
Will always, in some circumstances, in some ways, in our hearts and souls, always be the guy for what's he up to? Is he on a roster? Is he on a practice squad right now? Where is he at?
I don't know what he's up to. He was
running around with Tampa at one point. I don't know what's going on. He touched 9 teams at one point. It was ridiculous what was going on there. To go back to Kyler and Kliff, though, I think they're always going to be interloped and linked together, I think, because of just that was the number one reason Kliff was brought here. Kliff was always brought here because he was known for developing young quarterbacks, working with hyper-talented young quarterbacks, and he was going to be the right guy to develop Kyler, like you worry about, oh, like what about the defense? The defensive coordinator will handle that, whatever. Do you need an OC, all this kind of stuff? It was just more about him developing Kyler. And so when he said he banked his career on that, I don't necessarily think that pans out necessarily. I get what he's saying. I understand what he's saying, and that like his success was tied to the development of his young quarterback, and I get that. But we wouldn't necessarily say that banking on it didn't pay off and like is what got Kliff fired. Kliff got fired for numerous reasons. One of them was the lack of development for Kyler, but it wasn't the main reason in my opinion. So it was just one of those like, that's interesting that that's the perspective that he has on it, and like that's mine on it.
Well, what is he supposed to admit that? Oh, I got fired because of incompetence per se. It wasn't. It was in a sense incompetence, but the season that he got fired was also the season that Kyler tore his ACL and missed the latter half of the year. So what is the expectation supposed to be for a guy that just lost his quarterback, the guy that he's banking his whole career off of, the guy that he just came off an 11-win season with? I think there's a lot of layers that go into it. I'm not trying to defend Kliff. I think in the end it was the right move to move on. But I do think he has a little bit of a defense there in terms of how he's able to get back into this particular role again, right?
Right. I do to like slightly pivot the talking point that we're going towards. I still think this game matters to the Commanders in that way. I think that anytime you can find extra motivation anywhere, you're going to use it.
100%.
Like LeBron has talked about at length, not at length, but just one time involved the nugget of him looking around in the crowd pregame and finding his guy. Like, who's the LeBron hater sitting here who I'm going to look at all game?
Who's going to motivate me today? Who's it going to be?
Who's going to do that? And the Commanders don't really need any extra motivation as it is, but if they can find some just to win one for their guy, they're going to do it. So that is going to be, like Burnsy had the call yesterday, like he is going to get the game ball if they win. Like that is going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's really going to be fascinating which ways it goes. Like if Kyler plays really, really well, but the Washington offense struggles, we're coming in here saying, oh yeah, they moved on. But if it goes the other way, it's like we're not going to say it was a mistake necessarily, but it's just interesting how the conversation can extend from this game.
One thing I want to touch on really, really quick. Trey McBride did not practice again today. He's been in concussion protocol after getting knocked out of the game against the Lions. You concerned at all?
Yeah, just because he's a large part of what they do, 12, 13 personnel, all that stuff. Who's the third tight end now if he's out there? But also just the 12, 13 personnel works when you have one of the best tight ends in the league. Like it works for other teams in some instances, but we saw Detroit run a lot of it at the start of that game as well. That helps that they had Sam Laporta out there for that for sure.
And we've talked about the Lions and Cardinals kind of mirroring each other. Maybe Cardinals are a year behind if they're setting it up the same way. Yeah, Trey is a very important piece.